How's it, everyone? In this video, I wanted to talk about some tips and tricks that I use when I'm building hideouts, things I think about, little things that might make building the hideout easier. If you're an experienced hideout builder, you probably won't find too many useful things in this, but if you're new, want to build your first hideout, then you might find some very useful tricks in here. There's currently a hideout building competition being run by GGG at the moment, so you've got about 2.5 weeks left before that closes. So I would highly recommend getting into that. Hideout building is super niche, but it's a lot of fun, especially if you're into games like The Sims. I find it really fun. So without further ado, let's jump into the first tip. All right, so the first step is actually something you want to avoid, which is using too many of these things, right? When I first started building hideouts, I used a million glowing embers. There's also a different one like golden sparkles, I think. Yeah, these things, just if you're going to use them a little bit here and there, like to accentuate certain effects maybe. But if you're covering your entire hideout with this, it doesn't look as good as you think it does. I know it looks nice to have these particle effects floating around, but it just ends up looking really messy. I would avoid using them almost entirely, but if you do use them, use a very, very light touch on those. Next tip, if you're going to start a new hideout, I would highly recommend, before doing anything, hit the Reclaim All button, just so that you start with a completely clean slate. Whenever you select a new hideout, there's going to be a few bits and bobs like crates or, I don't know, carpets lying around. Just get rid of them, start with a clean slate, and then start building from there. Another thing you want to try and do is avoiding too much clutter. Like with the ember thing, don't just put things on the ground or the walls to make it look like there's something happening there. Rather, be a bit more considered. Maybe that's the look you're going for, but in general, don't just throw decorations on the ground for the sake of it. I've seen a lot of hideouts that will use a million plants on the ground, and then there's actually, it just ends up with no clarity. You don't really know what you're looking at. It's just like a mess of color. So be a bit more considered. I think I'm going to look at some other hideouts that are really good, but even here in this hideout that I made, things are kind of, there's details, but they're kind of clean. They're cordoned off to their respective places and they're not overdone. So think about that. Don't use decorations just for the sake of it. All right, so the next step is one that I think is really important, and that's to do with symmetry. So this is sort of compositionally speaking, if you're gonna have a hideout, don't make everything like perfectly in line and everything on like this side must mirror this side perfectly. It might sound obvious, but it is very tempting to do that because it's satisfying, but it doesn't look very good. So in this hideout, Underground Tavern, which you can find on hideoutshowcase.com, this isn't my hideout, but I just think it's a nice example of things being asymmetrical but still looking great, right? So on this side we've got this table and this table. They don't necessarily line up. The chairs are kind of off at slightly different angles, as if someone had been sitting there. You've got the end of the tavern over here, you've got a fireplace here, so things kind of, it feels nice and balanced, but it's not all just mirror images. Like it might be tempting to make this table completely match this table and have them all not perpendicular, parallel to one another. So just think a bit more about that. Also in my hideout, you can see this doesn't exactly match that, I made the point, just don't be too symmetrical and square. Okay, so the next tip I think is very useful is to actually use references. So let's say you want to make a tavern hideout. Let's say this guy inspires you and you think that's really cool. I want to make my own tavern hideout, but I don't want to copy this guy exactly. What you do is just Google pictures of taverns. Look at this picture, like what is in this room? There's chairs, there's a staircase, there's things on the walls, look at the lighting. How did they get this nice orange lighting? There's these pipes coming off. I don't know, I doubt that there are like beer dispensers in Path of Exile, but there's these bottles, there's things hanging off the wall. Just look at pictures of things. That'll really help you not only get inspired, but also when it comes to adding small details that really kind of take an average looking hideout to making it look really professional and great. These small details, these small realistic details are what are gonna bring it up to that next level. So definitely, I highly recommend using references. And speaking of references, another thing you can do to get inspired is to look at other people's hideouts. This is an incredibly popular one, Alien LV426. I think this is awesome. I think everyone loves this one, but just look at what this guy did. See if there's elements of it that you like. These pipes are really cool. The coloring, maybe you just say, I really like the steampunk look. So don't copy him, but see what makes this look good. There's the interesting colors, the metal look, the steampunk look. So use this as inspiration. Again, don't completely copy. I recommend copying if you're learning, but don't copy something and then pass it off as your own. But definitely another good thing to do is to download one of these hideouts, right? And see how they created it. Look at the decorations they use, because unless you're a very experienced hideout builder, you're not going to be able to identify which parts are which. Like you won't be able to say, oh, these are like pipe number 5 from Tane or whatever. Download it, press Z to bring up the decorations. You'll see everything they did. That's a very, very good way to learn, is to do that. It'll also fill up your decoration inventory with a lot of useful pieces. So yeah, that's for the next tip. Download other people's hideouts, look at them, get inspired, and then yeah. All right, next tip that I find very useful is to use hotkeys in the search function. So down here, you'll be able to see you can search. So if I want, I don't know, wood. Everyone wants a bit of wood in their hideout. You can Control F and type wood. Maybe you want to do that. Another thing that's very useful that I don't use this enough, but it can be really, really helpful, is if you press R, it'll rotate it clockwise. And if you push Shift R, it'll rotate it counterclockwise. I mainly use this wheel on the ground to turn things, but sometimes when it's very crowded, like here, and you try and click on this wheel, you start clicking on other things. So in that case, it can be very useful to use R and Shift R. And then again, use the cursor keys if you want to kind of get it in the exactly right position. That's also, the cursor keys are also very useful with finding like the edge of a wall to see exactly where it can go. So if I just keep hitting up, this will keep moving until it hits a wall, and then it'll stop. So that's more useful than kind of moving it around and seeing, okay, I want it to go as far as it can. And if you don't hit the exact edge, it won't move at all. So in that case, just use the cursor keys. So another tip I would say is to not necessarily exactly follow the walls of the hideout. So when you have your base hideout that's got nothing, you'll have these kind of blocks and squares and things. You can use those to kind of guide you, but don't necessarily exactly follow those hard lines. This is another good example where this guy's created a room out of the edge of the map, but then he's kind of curved it around. He didn't build this sort of straight across up to there and then hard down up against this wall. He's kind of created these discrete places. Here he's followed the wall, I assume. But like, this is a good example where he's got this wall and then something pokes out. Everything doesn't exactly hug the base. How do I put it? Like the base hideout with no decorations, if that makes sense. So yeah, don't necessarily have to follow the walls exactly. So another thing that I think is important is to not use the exact same decoration over and over and over again, especially when doing floor and walls. You don't want to use the exact same tile over and over again. And if you do, think of how you can rotate it and shift it so that there's some kind of distinction or interest between each part. So an example of this would be, let's say, fence, right? I don't know. Let's like create a quick wall here. So instead of just going, okay, wall, 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 it's all identical. Or perhaps a better example would be this bamboo fence, right? Because it's got quite a few variations. Instead of just doing this where all the walls look the same, you can change them around, create a bit more interest like this. Also, if you want to rotate it, that can also help if you're using the same piece. So let's say bamboo fence 2. These two are actually identical but flipped around. So you can use that to prevent a sort of static look. I don't know how to explain it, but in real life, everything is not exactly perfect. So don't use the exact same part over and over again. Maybe like this, it's a design you like. So you can use like 10 of the same pieces, but try rotate it, shift it, move it around so that it doesn't look exactly perfect. Perfection is not always a good thing. So another thing to think of is detail. And this is probably the hardest part of hideout building, I would say. When you're thinking of things that kind of make it look real and small details that you don't quite overuse, those are the things that will make your hideout look really good. I'll look at some other ones now, but just for example, in this hideout we're in now, I've got like this little plant that kind of is growing out of the edge of this metal pipe. I kind of thought, okay, there's water going down this pipe. Water means life, right? So why not have a little plant here? And then a bit of algae growing out from behind this metal pipe. And again, over here, I've got these plants, but in between the plants, there's these sewer mosses that are growing on the edge of the wood. Small things like that. Let's have a look at this tavern, right? In terms of detail, this I think is pretty amazing. He's got these tables with these little, I don't know if this is part of the table, it might be, but look here, like he's got these lanterns on the wall and he's got a picture over the fireplace and these candles. He's got this flag up here, another hanging lantern, little barrels everywhere, chest of armor, small things. And it's not too much detail, but it's just enough that it feels real, that there's some sort of, it feels lived in. So consider those things when you're building your hideout for sure. All right, the next one is functionality. So not only functionality in terms of the hideout being real in the world, like here I've got a house, but then there's a pot with maybe water and food, but functionality in terms of your masters. This is something I used to overlook. I would make this big hideout, very elaborate, and then when you spoke to Alva to try and open a portal, suddenly you couldn't enter them. So think about that, especially Alva, Zana, and Jun are the ones that open portals. So try leave some space around them when you do them. I know that if I open a portal to one of Alva's incursions here, they should be fairly easily accessible. Jun might be a little tricky, but if I do start doing a bunch of betrayal things, I would probably just move her over here. There's space around her to move. I think my Zana is a little bit cramped. But again, if I decide to do one, I can just quickly pull her out like that and get access. But yeah, think about that when you're making your hideout. All right, so another critical thing you need to think about is lighting. And it's very easy to go overboard with lighting, but if you put a few highlights just here and there, it can really, really change the feeling of the place. So as you can see, this is quite a dark, dank, spooky feeling area. I'm going to change these lights around quickly and then show you the difference. And yeah, you'll be able to tell how big a difference lighting makes. So as you can see, I've changed these lights all from dark green, and it completely changed the feel from being quite cold and gloomy to being a lot warmer. So definitely think about your lighting. Again, don't use too many lights. It's very tempting when you start to, want to light up everything and make every square inch of your hideout super well lit. That might work in some hideouts, but it's nice to actually, again, in terms of symmetry, not necessarily have everything lit up in the exact same way. I think this area is maybe, let's not delete all our plants. This is an example of that, I suppose, where over by June, it's a bit darker and there's this shadow that leans in here, and then just think about that. All right, so the last few tips, I would just highly recommend saving as much as you can. If you hit this export button, it'll export your hideout. You can name it like hideout progress _1. That's your save button. Definitely use it. I mean, it's not like the game's going to crash and you're going to lose your progress, but you might hit the reclaim all button, or maybe you move something in a weird place and you want to revert. Just save frequently-ish. I normally save maybe once every hour or so, but yeah. Another tip, don't be afraid to delete things. If you're doing something and it doesn't work and it's not feeling right, delete it, start again. I'm not necessarily talking about an entire hideout, but for example, my map room, I really struggled with, and it went through about 4 or 5 different versions, and I repeatedly just deleted everything, started again. That's where your save button is going to come in helpful. So you can save before you start doing your map room or whatever, save, work on it. If it's not working, revert back to the old version and keep going. That way you don't have to click a million things and delete them. Another teeny tiny tip, the last one, not exactly the most important, but when you start a hideout, keep all your masters close. So if you're starting here, try space them out a little bit so that they're not on top of each other, but keep them all there so that if you need to buy a decoration, you can just run up to, let's say, Einhar, click him, buy what you need without having to run around. And then as you move throughout your hideout, kind of move them with you. So anyway, those are all the tips I have. If you guys have any other ones, let me know in the comments below. And I hope you found some of these helpful. Please like and subscribe, and check me out on Twitch. I'm at twitch.tv/localhole. And good luck to everyone for the hideout competition. I've seen a lot of awesome ones, and I'm looking forward to see the results. So yeah, take care. Bye-bye.
Divine power! Divine power! It's branching, Exile. You're making me nervous.